All right, hello again, and welcome back to another video in our series summarizing Area Study 2, Decision Making in Markets. Today we're going to be looking at the laws of demand and the laws of supply in a little bit of depth. First up, we have the law of demand. So the law of demand is really quite simple. You can relate it to yourself pretty easily, and that is that as the price of a good or service increases, the quantity of that good or service demanded decreases. So as price goes up, demand goes down. You can relate that to your own life. When a product that you want goes up in price, you tend to want it a lot less. The opposite is also true. So as the price of a good or services decreases, the quantity demanded increases. So as something gets cheaper, you tend to want a lot more of it. A personal example of this is that we currently have an addiction to buying picture books for our daughter Eleanor, and there was a book that we wanted to buy for her that we couldn't find in stores. I randomly searched for it on Amazon, and rather than being the $15 or $20 it wasn't meant to be in store, it was $3.01 with free postage. So that price decrease to $3.01 made me demand a whole lot more of it and buy it instantly. The same can be said of many different products. One of my favorite examples is connoisseur ice cream. It is like $11 a tub normally, and that is far too much for 1 liter of ice cream, even though it is delicious ice cream. But when the price decreases to half price, which happens a few times a year, you better believe we buy a whole lot of it and stock up the freezer, because that ice cream is delicious and I want to have a lot of it, but I'm not paying $11 for it. So as price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. Either one of those is a full mark definition for what the law of demand is. So make sure you know one of them really well. Hopefully it's common sense for you, but either way, that is the definition that you need to know. So we look at this and it goes on to a demand curve. To look at what a fully labeled demand curve is, there are a few different elements that you need to have present. So firstly, you need to have your Y and X axes labeled. The Y axis should always be price and the X axis should always be quantity. And then we've got a title. So the title is really important, market for whatever good or service it is about. So if we're going about what we were just talking about, the market for ice cream, that would be your title. So they're two of your marks. Sometimes it depends. You're either going to get, on my stacks personally, there's going to be 2 marks for the fully labeled diagram, or it might be 4 marks for a fully labeled diagram. Most likely 2 marks, because 4 marks is way too much and I'm not that generous. So if we look at the demand curve, other things that you need to have the demand curve with the correct orientation. So it needs to be facing downwards. It's a little bit dumb, but to remember that, I think demand starts with D. D means down. You also need to label it with a little d at the bottom there to show that it is demand. That's a fully labeled diagram. If you've done that, that is great. Remember it like that. Demand, downward sloping, you'll be perfect. Then if we look at movements in demand, movements along the demand curve only happen when there's a change in the selling price for that particular good or service. So our little y-axis here, that's about the selling price. So a movement along the demand curve only happens when there is a change in selling price. So if we look at a couple of different points, let's keep going with the ice cream example because it is 10:09 in the morning and who doesn't want ice cream at this time? Let's just be realistic. So let's just say the regular price for connoisseur ice cream, that $11 a tub I was just talking about before. A little bit ridiculous, very high price. At that price, there is not a lot of demand for that ice cream. So we'll mark that down here. Whereas when we talk about it being half price, so if we make it, and because I'm drawing it with a mouse, I'm just going to make it $5. When that price decreases to $5, you can see there is quite a large increase in demand, which we call an expansion of demand. It's very important for you to use that terminology, that expansion of demand. So we'll call these Q1 and Q2. And you can see that as the price has fallen, there has been a significant rise in the overall quantity demanded. And that is an expansion of demand. Expansion. The opposite is also true. So let's just say it was on special for $5 and now suddenly it is no longer on special for $5 and has gone back to full price. When it goes back up to full price, there is a contraction of demand where suddenly the price rises, the quantity demanded decreases, and we move back up to that original quantity up there, and we call that a contraction of demand. So make sure you use that terminology, that expansion and contraction. That is really, really important to make sure you're using that explicit economic terminology that shows you understand and can convey your knowledge in the way that's expected of you by VCAR. So that's movement of demand. So only changes in selling price. If anything other than the selling price changes, it's what we're going to talk about next, which is shifts. So you only have movements along that curve when it is a change in the selling price. Make sure you remember that. Movements are only changes in the selling price of that particular good or service. Then we move on to shifts in demand. So shifts in demand occur whenever a non-price factor, so anything other than that selling price, impacts the overall level of demand and creates a new demand curve. So favorable shifts in demand are whenever there is a shift to the right, which means there is more demand at any given price. So look at my dodgy second demand line there. So that is a favorable shift there. If we were to look at an unfavorable shift, it's when there is less demand at any given price, and we'll call that D3. So if it moves to the right, there is currently more demand. So you can see like where this line is here. If we look at the same price along here, so let's go with a different color. Let's go with purple. If we were to dash along a beautifully straight line like this is, you can see with the unfavorable shift, there is currently less quantity demanded at the same price as there originally was. And with the favorable shift, there is a lot more being demanded at that same price. So a non-price factor refers to anything other than the selling price changing. One of my favorite examples and one of the easiest examples for this is when there is good advertising for a good or service. So when there is good advertising or effective advertising, that is going to cause a favorable shift in demand, because at any given price, suddenly people are going to want more of that good or service, and therefore there is going to be an increased level of demand, and that creates a whole new demand curve. An unfavorable shift is whenever something negative occurs, it's going to create a whole lot less demand for that good or service. A good example at the moment, so during this pandemic, all of the bars, nightlife, etc., have been closed because they're not deemed essential services. So because of that non-price factor, there's suddenly an incredibly reduced level of demand for those things. So bars, pubs, clubs, etc. So that would be an unfavorable shift in demand. It would be an incredibly large unfavorable shift in demand, which has occurred because of a non-price factor. So on the next slide, we're going to look at some examples of non-price factors for demand. There's a lot. All of them boil down into one of two categories, and you can really relate them to yourself. If you think in your own point of view, if the situation or the example that you're given or the factor that you're given would make you want to buy more of that good or service, that is going to be favorable. If the situation that you're given or the example that you're given would make you want to purchase less of that good or service, that is going to be unfavorable. So if we look at some of these examples here, changes in disposable income. So at the moment, that's happening to a lot of people. A lot of people have lost their jobs because of this pandemic. So for a lot of people, they are moving from what may have been a salary that could have been up to, well, if we look at the average salary, it's about $87,000 a year. Some of these people are moving on to a maximum of $1,500 a fortnight based on the JobKeeper payments the government are going to be giving out. So they've had a decreased disposable income overall. And so because of that, it means that they are going to demand less goods and services overall. So because of that, there'll be an unfavorable shift in any given market because of that change in the disposable income. If people's disposable income increases, it's likely to increase their overall demand for goods and services and therefore create a favorable shift. The price of substitute products is an important one. So substitute products are any two products or any multitude of products that are directly interchangeable with each other or seen as substitutes. Sometimes we talk about this with things like Coke and Pepsi, even though there is some brand loyalty that people have for them. It's a pretty easy example to use. So for example, if the price of Coke goes up, there is going to be a favorable shift in demand for Pepsi as people start demanding more Pepsi at any given price because Coke is suddenly more expensive. So people are demanding more Pepsi even though nothing has changed for the price of Pepsi. We've got the price of complementary products. So two products that go really well together. So to brag a little bit, we have a pool in the backyard. And so because we have a pool, water goes with the pool. So we have to demand more water and there'd be a favorable demand in the shift. There'd be a favorable shift in the demand for water because we have to fill our pool, and that's a complementary product. Other examples there would be bread and butter, bread and Nutella, anything like that where two products go really well together. So if the price of one decreases, there'll be a favorable shift in demand for the other one. So if we looked at if the price of bread decreased, there'd be a favorable shift in the market for butter because suddenly people are demanding more butter at any given price. We can look at preferences and taste changing. This would be a big one to use the example of gym equipment. Suddenly, because people can't go to a traditional gym, they are demanding way more fitness equipment than they were before because people's preferences have changed. Well, they haven't really had a choice for their preferences to change, but people are now wanting to work out at home because they want to stay healthy through the isolation, and therefore there has been a massive increase in demand for fitness equipment. And in almost any fitness equipment you look at, if you look online, almost everything is sold out everywhere. And that is because people are demanding it because they want to be able to train at home. I know, for example, for myself, I was lucky to buy a bunch of things and already have a lot of things beforehand, but even some things that I've ordered have had a really long shipping time because the businesses can't keep up with the increase in demand that's occurred. So that would be a current favorable increase in the demand for fitness equipment. Changes in interest rates. Interest rates have been falling. When interest rates are lower, it means it's cheaper to borrow money, and therefore you can afford to purchase more goods and services because you don't have to pay as much interest on your home loans or debts, and therefore you can afford to demand more, and therefore that's going to lead to a favorable increase in demand. If interest rates increase, it is going to be an unfavorable shift for demand. Changes in population. So as the population grows, there'll be more demand for goods and services. It's as simple as that. More people need more goods and services, therefore it's a favorable shift. Consumer confidence or sentiment. Consumer confidence is all about how good consumers feel about their future incomes, employment, etc. Based on that definition, you could probably have come to the conclusion that people do not currently feel that confident about their future incomes and employment. So consumer confidence is fairly low at the moment, and it's likely to probably get lower. And therefore, if you were to use consumer confidence as an example, at the moment, it's leading to unfavorable shifts in demand in a lot of markets because people don't feel confident about their future spending. Like, people aren't going to book a holiday or book an overseas trip, partly because they can't, and partly because they're not sure if they're going to be able to afford it. And lastly, government intervention. When any government laws or regulations or anything the government does impacts the level of demand in a market. The usual simple example I use for this is the fact that because it is law that you must wear a helmet when you ride a bike, that would lead to a favorable shift in the demand for helmets, because if people buy a bike, they then need to have a helmet for that bike or for themselves. There's a lot of this at the moment. So because of government intervention, there's going to be changes in a lot of markets, like we said before, with bars, etc., an unfavorable shift. Because of that, because of the government intervention, there's been some weird impact. So because of everything closing down and people having to isolate at home, There have been things like there is shortages because of increase in demand for things like jigsaw puzzles and, like we said before, fitness equipment, video game consoles. All these things have been selling incredibly well because people are trying to occupy themselves because of this government intervention, and it's led to favorable shifts in all of these different markets. That's going to be it for today's video. Just going to look at demand. I'll create a new video very soon that looks at the law of supply and all the things that impact that. On that, I hope you have a very good day and you found this video useful. If you have any questions, feel free to either comment below this video or send me an email. I'm more than happy to help. On that, I hope to see you soon. Have a great day, and I will see you next time with more economics content. Goodbye. Have a good day.